All right, so for our next video, let's talk a little bit about the transfer of heat. Now, you may have already heard this, but heat always flows from hot to cold. So the classic, you're letting the cold air out. If you open the front door on a hot summer day, well, you're really letting the hot air in. And that's pedantic, but it is actually true. Heat only flows from hot things to cold things, or from a high temperature to a low temperature. And if something's left long enough, if you've got a bunch of things at different temperatures and you leave them alone, eventually things reach thermal equilibrium. The hot things give their heat to the cold things until everything is the same temperature. If everything's the same temperature, heat's not going to flow. There isn't a hot object or a cold object. They're all the same, so they stop trading heat energy. Now, heat is transferred in three ways: conduction, convection, and radiation. So let's talk first about conduction. This is the most straightforward way in which you can transfer heat. Conduction is heat transfer through direct contact. If two things are touching each other, the hotter object will give its heat energy to the colder object. The rate of that transfer depends on the substance. So, you can find two objects sitting around in your house right now. They've been sitting in this same room for a while, which means they've reached thermal equilibrium. They should be at the same temperature. However, one object might feel colder. It's not colder, they're the same temperature, but it feels colder because it's taking away heat faster. And my classic example here is metal versus plastic, or maybe glass versus plastic. Look around your house, or even right now where I'm sitting. I've got some glass baubles sitting around. Those things feel cold because they suck the heat out of me. It depends on the substance. They're different than, say, this wood. I put my hands against my wooden desk. It might feel slightly cool to the touch, but not nearly as cold as those other objects, like if I had some coins, or I've got a key sitting right here. Certain objects feel colder because they're sucking the heat out of you at a faster rate. They aren't actually colder, they're actually the same temperature, but the way we interpret it is based on our sensation. For the same reason, when you get out of a pool, before you jumped in, the air outside was just the same temperature as after you get out. But when you get out of that pool, it sure feels colder. That's because your wet skin actually conducts heat more efficiently, faster than your dry skin. So when you are wet, you conduct heat faster. And that air that was the same temperature all of a sudden feels colder now that you're getting out of that pool and your skin is wet. The next type of heat transfer we'll talk about is convection. Now, convection is the process of physically moving something to another place, physically moving a hot or cold mass. This is typically the fastest way to change temperature. Now, if you just sit two things next to each other and let them touch, yes, eventually they'll reach thermal equilibrium through conduction. They slowly give their heat away. But the fastest way, typically, to change something's temperature is to just move something hot or cold to your place that you want the temperature to change. This is how air conditioning works. You actually cool the air down or heat it up in one place in your furnace or the compressor. What do you do then? You take that hot or cold air and distribute it around the building or around your house. Air conditioning physically moves cold air around a building. It doesn't just create some cold and let it sit there and pull the heat away from the rest of the building. It goes ahead and just moves that cold air right where it wants it to be cold. Actually moving something that's hot or cold is usually the fastest way to transfer heat, physically moving it, and that is the process of convection. And lastly, we have radiation. Radiation is light carrying away heat. Infrared light radiates away from anything with a temperature. You and I are constantly radiating heat. We don't see this in the visible spectrum because it's not visible light, it's infrared light. But you and I radiate heat. Light from the sun brings heat to the earth. As I said, anything with a temperature is radiating heat. That means literally everything in the universe, everything has some non-zero temperature and is radiating heat to some extent or another. But those are the three ways in which we transfer heat.